The woman had been standing in the rain for nearly an hour when Caleb Mercer finally opened the ranch house door. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for a room. She held out a blackened brass key and said, "If you still own the north pasture, you need to lock your gate before sunrise." Caleb stared at her through the yellow porch light. Rain ran from the brim of his hat. Behind the woman stood a broken wagon, a trembling gray mare, and a boy of 10 curled beneath a wet canvas. "Who are you?" "Eleanor Voss." "And why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't." That answer made him lower the shotgun. "The boy was injured. Bring him inside." The woman hesitated. "He's my brother." "I didn't ask whose he was." Caleb stepped into the rain and carried the boy into the house. By dawn, the boy's ankle had been set. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee between both hands, while Caleb studied the brass key. "What does it open?" "The old water office in Mercy Creek." Caleb looked up. "That building has been empty for 6 years. Someone is using it." "Who?" "Men who don't want you to know what they're doing." Eleanor reached into her coat and unfolded a county map. 3 weeks ago, a surveyor came to town. He claimed he was measuring irrigation channels, but his map showed your ranch divided into 12 parcels. "My land isn't for sale." "I know." "Then why map it?" "Because they aren't planning to buy it." Caleb's eyes hardened. What are they planning? "Take it." Eleanor told him about Judge Silas Rourke, the county's most powerful man, and Elias Creed, a land speculator who had quietly bought failing ranches throughout the territory. A new railroad water station was planned near Caleb's north boundary. If the county could make his pasture appear useless or declare it necessary for public works, the land could be condemned. "The hearing is tomorrow," Eleanor said. Caleb leaned back. "Why didn't you warn me sooner?" "I tried. Your foreman said you were out checking cattle." "I was. I came back at dusk. 2 men followed me." "Who?" "I don't know." "What did they want?" "They told me to stop asking questions." She looked toward the hallway. "My brother disappeared last night." Caleb's expression changed. "You said he was with you." "He was." "Men came to the schoolhouse." "Daniel told me to run." "You left him?" "I went for help." "The sheriff?" "He told me to go home." "So you came here." "I came to the one man in the county who owns enough land to make them nervous." Caleb picked up the key. "Where did you get this?" "It was in the pocket of one of the men who took my brother." The room went quiet. Caleb walked to the window. The storm was breaking over the eastern ridge. His north pasture lay beyond the cottonwoods, green and open beneath the pale. "Morning, Tom," he called. His ranch hand entered. "Get 3 horses." "Ready?" Eleanor stood. "You shouldn't." "Go." Caleb looked at her. "You rode through a storm with an injured boy to warn me my land was being stolen. Now you're telling me not to investigate?" "You don't understand." "I understand enough. They aren't only trying to take your ranch. What else?" "They want to make sure you never reach tomorrow's hearing." They rode toward Mercy Creek before the sun cleared the ridge. Eleanor rode beside Caleb in a borrowed coat. Tom followed with the spare horse. Near town, Eleanor suddenly raised her hand. "Stop!" Caleb reined in. She pointed toward the trees, fresh tracks, 4 horses. Caleb studied them, then a rifle cracked. The bullet struck a sign beside his head. "Down!" He pulled Eleanor from the saddle as Tom fired toward the ridge. A second shot split the branches. The shooter vanished. Tom started after him. "Don't," Caleb said. "Why?" "Because they want us chasing." Caleb looked at the tracks. They left them where we would see them. Eleanor's face went pale. "Then what do they want us to find?" Caleb mounted. "We're about to find out." Mercy Creek looked peaceful when they entered. Judge Rourke stood outside the courthouse. With 2 railroad men, on the courthouse steps sat Daniel. His hands were Tied Eleanor nearly fell from her horse. Daniel! Caleb caught her arm. Wait! The boy wasn't looking at his. Sister. He was staring at the courthouse. Roof. Caleb followed his gaze. A rifleman lay behind the chimney, then the rifle fired. Caleb dragged Eleanor behind a wagon. Tom returned fire. The town erupted as horses screamed and doors slammed. Daniel kicked one rope loose and rolled down the steps. Eleanor ran to him. They took me to the old water office, Daniel gasped. What did you see? Boxes, maps, men digging. Who? Judge Rourke. And another man. What man? Daniel swallowed. He had one hand. Caleb's face hardened. Elias. Creed, Daniel nodded. They said the river would be moved, Eleanor understood first. They're diverting the river, Caleb. Looked toward the north. If the river changed course, his lower pasture would dry. Then Rourke could condemn it. Creed could buy it cheaply, and the railroad could build its water station. 3 men. One plan. Caleb looked at Eleanor. Where is the water office? Past the old mill. They rode there. The building was half buried in weeds. The brass key opened the door. Inside were metal boxes filled with deeds, railroad contracts, survey maps, and payment ledgers. Eleanor spread one map across the desk. Red line ran beneath Caleb's north pasture. A tunnel, she whispered. Caleb opened another box. Second map showed an underground diversion channel leading directly to the river. They've already started digging. A floorboard creaked. They turned. Nothing. Then, Eleanor saw a faded red ribbon hanging beside the door. Her mother's. My mother died 5 years ago. Caleb looked at the ribbon. A tiny number 7 was stitched inside. The same number, stamped on the key. He opened the final box. Inside was an old ledger. Names, payments, bribes. Then, Eleanor saw her own name. Beneath it was an entry dated 7 years earlier. Her mother's name was there too. Her father's name followed. Witness to the original water agreement. Eleanor's face went white. My father worked for the railroad. Caleb said nothing. I was told he died in a boiler. Accident. A noise came from outside. Several horses. Then Judge Rourke's voice carried through the broken doorway. He has the ledger. Find him. Caleb blew out the lamp. He and Eleanor moved toward the back wall, where a narrow passage disappeared beneath the floor. The tunnel led beneath the pasture. They crawled through darkness until the sound of rushing water grew louder. Then they emerged inside a cavern. 12 men were digging around a stone channel. Timbers supported the ceiling. A wooden gate blocked the underground stream. Caleb stared. They're going to open that gate. Eleanor pointed to the central support beam. If that breaks, the tunnel comes down. And us with it. She looked at the men below. We can't fight 12 men. No. She tightened her grip on the brass key, but we don't have to. A guard turned. Who's there? Gunfire erupted. Caleb fired toward the lamps while Eleanor crawled beneath the beam toward the gate. She reached the mechanism. Dot locked. She pulled a thin iron pin from her coat. Caleb stared. You carry that? I used to repair the schoolhouse stove. She jammed the pin into the lock. The gate groaned. Water surged. Across the cavern, Elias Creed appeared. Eleanor! She turned. Creed raised his pistol. You should have stayed in your schoolhouse. Eleanor stared at him. My father should have stayed alive. Creed froze. Caleb looked at her. You know what happened to him? He refused to sign the water transfer, she said. You killed him because he wouldn't give you the river. The cavern shook. A support timber cracked. Caleb shouted, Run! Eleanor grabbed the ledger as the roof began to fall. The first timber crashed behind them. Caleb seized Eleanor's hand and pulled her toward the tunnel. Then, he heard Daniel scream. The boy had followed them into the cavern. He was trapped beneath a fallen beam near the entrance. Eleanor, turn back. My brother! I'll get him. You can't lift it alone. Then help me. They reached Daniel as dust filled the air. Caleb wedged his shoulder beneath the beam while Eleanor pulled stones away with both hands. Move! The beam lifted just enough. Daniel crawled free. A second support cracked. They ran. Behind them, water thundered through the cavern as the diversion gate tore loose. The underground channel flooded, sweeping tools and timber toward the far wall. Caleb, Eleanor, and Daniel burst into the pasture. The river roared back into its natural course. For several seconds, they could only breathe. Then, Eleanor looked at the ledger. It has everything. Caleb nodded. Then they can't bury this. They rode back toward Mercy Creek Judge. Rourke was waiting outside the courthouse. So was the sheriff. Elias Creed stood beside him. Soaked and furious? You have something that belongs to me, Rourke said. Caleb held the ledger beneath his coat. No, I have something that belongs to the county. Rourke smiled. You think a book will save you? Eleanor stepped forward. It won't have to. She opened the ledger. Your name is on every page. The sheriff looked at Rourke. For the first time, the judge looked uncertain. Creed reached for his pistol. Caleb's revolver was already drawn. Don't! Creed stopped. The town had turned against him. Storekeepers watched from their doors. Ranchers stood along the boardwalk. Even men who had once feared the judge now understood what the water scheme meant. If Rourke could steal Caleb Mercer's river, he could steal theirs next. The sheriff slowly removed his badge. I'll be taking you in. Judge! Rourke stared at him. You work for me. The sheriff shook his head. Not anymore. He took the ledger from Eleanor. Where did you get this? The old water office. The sheriff opened it. His face changed. There were payments to deputies, county clerks, surveyors, and railroad agents. Then he saw a name that made him look at Eleanor. Your father. Eleanor nodded. What really happened to him? The sheriff looked away. I was there. Her breath caught. Tell me. It was 7 years ago. Your father found the original water agreement. He discovered Rourke and Creed had changed the county records. He refused to sign the replacement. What happened? The sheriff's voice dropped. Creed threatened him. Your father told him he would take the papers to the territorial office. And then? He never reached town. Eleanor closed her eyes. All these years I thought he died in an accident. I was afraid to tell the truth. Caleb looked at the sheriff. And now? The man removed his hat. Now I'm tired of being afraid. That afternoon, the courthouse filled with testimony. Eleanor placed the original water agreement on the judge's desk. Her father's signature was at the bottom. The agreement guaranteed the ranchers access to the river. Rourke had built his entire scheme on a forged replacement. The railroad officials, who had come for the hearing, wanted nothing to do with him once they understood what he had done. By sunset, federal marshals had arrived. Rourke was arrested for fraud, and conspiracy. Creed was taken with him. But the hardest moment came after the courthouse emptied. Eleanor stood alone on the steps. Caleb approached. You all right? No. He nodded. I didn't think so. She looked at the western sky. I spent 7 years believing my father abandoned us. Caleb said nothing. I hated him for it. He didn't abandon you. I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. I just wish I could tell him. Caleb removed his hat. I think he would have known. She looked at him. How? Because you didn't run when it mattered. She laughed softly through her tears. You make everything sound simple. It isn't. He paused. Nothing worth keeping is. Weeks passed. The river settled, the north pasture turned green again, the railroad moved its water station east, and Daniel's ankle healed, and Eleanor returned to the schoolhouse, but things were different. Caleb began bringing books for the children, then firewood, then a new stove. One evening, Eleanor found him repairing the schoolhouse fence. "You know," she said. "Most ranchers hire someone for that." "I know." "Then why are you doing it?" Caleb tightened a wire. "Because your fence is crooked," she smiled. "It was crooked before you came." "Not anymore." She watched him work. "You've been here 3 times this week." 4. 4! He looked at her. "I was counting." Oh, quiet moment passed. Then Eleanor said, "Are you trying to court me?" Caleb almost dropped the wire. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a relief. I was trying to decide how to ask." Her smile grew. "And?" He looked toward the ranch house in the distance. "I've got a spare house near the garden." "For what?" "A teacher." "You don't have any children?" "I might." She stared at him. Caleb cleared his throat. "I mean someday, if you wanted a family." Eleanor's expression softened. "You are a very poor speaker when you're nervous." "I've never been nervous around cattle. That doesn't surprise me." She stepped closer. "What happened to the brass key?" Caleb reached into his coat. He handed it to her. "I kept it." "Why?" "Because you left it." She turned it over. In her palm, the little number 7 caught the evening light. "Mother used to say a key means nothing unless someone has the courage to turn it." Caleb smiled. She was right. Eleanor looked at the ranch, then at the schoolhouse. Then, back at him. "I'll take the house." Caleb nodded. "And the teaching?" "Yes," he smiled. "And the other offer?" She slipped the key into her pocket. "I'll consider it." "That sounds fair." "It is." They married the following spring, not in a grand church. There was no silver carriage or crowd of important men. They stood beneath the cottonwoods beside the river, with Daniel holding the rings and Tom Bell pretending not to wipe his eyes. Eleanor kept teaching. Caleb kept ranching. And together, they built a home where the schoolhouse children were always welcome, where the coffee was strong, and where the brass key hung beside the kitchen door. Years later, travelers heard about the water dispute, but the old-timers remembered a different part. They remembered the school teacher, who rode through a storm to warn a man she barely knew. They remembered the rancher who listened when a frightened stranger told him something he did not want to hear, and they remembered that the river eventually returned to its rightful course, sometimes on quiet evenings. Caleb and Eleanor sat together on the porch while the cattle settled. Under the stars, she would pour coffee. He would watch the water. They did not need many words. The West had taught them that courage was not always a gun in a man's hand. Sometimes it was a woman refusing to be silent. Sometimes it was a boy brave, enough to point toward danger, and sometimes it was simply choosing to believe someone when the truth was inconvenient. The brass key never opened the water office again. That building was gone, but it remained beside their kitchen door until the end of their lives, not because it was valuable, because it reminded them that a door can stay locked for years while a life waits on the other side. And sometimes all it takes is one brave person to turn the key. Did you see Caleb and Eleanor's final choice coming? Tell me what you would have done in Eleanor's place, and let me know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories of the Old West, courage, justice, and second chances, subscribe and ride with us into the next story.